The month of July 1951 was the year's main event. The United Nations and North Korea began peace negotiations to put an end to the Korean War. The United Nations hoped for a quick resolution, but this would not be the case. The peace talks would last for 2 years while fighting in Korea continued. When at last an armistice was signed, Korea would remain divided, with a communist regime in the north and a fledgling democracy in the south. The war had started on June 25, 1950, when the North Korean People's Army crossed the 38th parallel that divided North from South Korea. With the backing of the Soviet Union, North Korea's leader, General Secretary Kim Il-sung, was intent on capturing the South Korean Republic and unifying the nation under a single communist regime. The army advanced rapidly, overwhelming the South Koreans and taking the capital city of Seoul in less than a week. However, North Korea's hopes of a quick surrender by the South evaporated when, with the backing of the United Nations, the United States entered the war. As weapons and troops poured into the South, UN forces pushed the North Korean army back. When United Nations forces crossed into North Korea, the People's Republic of China entered the war, defending their North Korean comrades. UN forces retreated, and by mid-1951, the land battle had reached a stalemate, and fighting centered around the 38th parallel. On July 10, 1951, peace negotiations began at Kaesong in central Korea. A major issue of the negotiations was the repatriation of prisoners of war. Tens of thousands of communist prisoners were held in camps on Koje Island off the coast of South Korea. The communist negotiators insisted that all prisoners were to be returned to China or North Korea. However, thousands of the prisoners were unwilling to be repatriated, and they staged several violent mutinies in the Koje prison camps. On November 29, 1952, US presidential election candidate Dwight D. Eisenhower fulfilled a campaign promise by going to Korea intent on finding out what could be done to end the conflict. Eventually, a plan was formulated that would grant asylum to those prisoners who wished to stay and repatriate those wishing to go home. As the negotiations dragged on, war in Korea continued. UN forces were determined to recapture all of South Korea before an agreement was made that could lead to territorial losses. Meanwhile, the Chinese were determined to maintain a communist border. On July 27, 1953, after 2 years and 17 days of negotiations, the UN and North Korean leaders signed an armistice. By this time, the front line was set around the 38th parallel, and neither side could claim victory. A demilitarized zone was established along the parallel. It would become one of the world's most heavily armed borders. Shortly after the signing, Operation Big Switch happened, and thousands of prisoners from both sides were repatriated or released. The armies withdrew from fighting positions, and a UN commission was set up to supervise the armistice. The main event of 1951 had ended, but left Korea divided. In the south, the Republic of Korea would grow into a modern democracy, while north of the border, Kim Il-sung's Democratic People's Republic would remain a tightly controlled communist state.